Hey there, everyone. It's Andy Baker here, and I'm back with another episode of the Creative AI podcast, where I talk with filmmakers, writers, and artists about creating in the age of artificial intelligence. This episode is a good one. I'm talking with Scott Easley, senior lecturer at USC's Viterbi School of Engineering, and he's playing around at the bleeding edge of video game visual development. We dive into the evolution of video games, the integration of AI in game development, and the centrality of humanity in creativity. We then turn to his work as a professor, where Scott emphasizes the role of students in shaping the future of game design and the iterative process of creation. He also walks us through some of his work and techniques. A link to the blog post with all of the images is in the show notes, and highlights the importance of artistic intent and the inspiration that technology can provide. Scott is thoughtful, philosophically and technologically adept, and he likes the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, so you're going to love this guy as much as I did. All right, so I am on here with Scott Easley, and he is at USC at this very moment, and spring break, if I'm not mistaken. And so what I would love for you to do right now is just introduce yourself to the listeners, give them a little bit of the background, how you got to where you are, and then a bit about what you're doing now, and we'll roll from there.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'd be delighted. Hi, my name is Scott Easley. I work in the Viterbi School of Engineering. I've been here about 21 years. Previous to this, I worked in the video game industry at places ranging from Oddworld Inhabitants. I was the 8th person to form that company. And I then worked for THQ and EA. And I got the opportunity to teach part-time here, which I did for a number of years. And then they opened up their games program. And I switched to full-time. And I'm now a senior lecturer here at the Viterbi School of Engineering, but I am part of USC Games, which is a joint program between cinema and engineering. It's a very unique program, and I'm extremely proud to be part of it because it's always exciting between the technological advances as well as the incessant student creativity that's always kind of bringing something new.
So one, I had to resist this when I first got on the call with you. Oddworld, I wanted to geek out because I loved Oddworld back in the day. Yeah, it was so much fun. Dr. Dwayne Lewis, I know him through Brent Friedman. Brent and I, while working on scripts together, played that game almost ceaselessly while we were working through script stuff. So again, one of the great joys of doing this podcast is talking to people and being able to say, thank you. Like you're a maker, you're a creator, you brought things into the world. And it's always nice, right? To meet people who it's like, oh, I had an impact. Like I had no idea, but like I put this thing out into the world and there's lots of people out there. And I happen to be one of them that really loved it.
That's really cool. I really appreciate that. It is one of the great things about working at Oddworld was that we had some very driven creatives at the top, and it was created in San Luis Obispo, and I think we had like 2.5 years to work on the first one. Again, this is 20 odd years ago, but we worked on it very intensely. Like the little group of people were a family. We would go out and have dinner together. We would show up to work together, just work through the night. And we really had no idea what we were doing, but it allowed us to be very focused. And again, this kind of pleasant little Mayberry town of San Luis Obispo that I adore was a great calming balm after, being so passionate and so intense, working with very passionate and very intense people. And so it was manageable. We weren't part of the slipstream of LA, like who's hot, who's not, that kind of constant turnover and that attention. So we came out with the first game. My then girlfriend, now wife, we took a trip, went to the UK. And I walked in a place I think it was Aberdeen in Scotland. And there was Oddworld paraphernalia everywhere. And I went, wait, what? And of course she piped up and said, she said, he works at Oddworld. And he goes, no way. And he went to the back and said, we got a man from Oddworld here. They all came out and, looked at me like I was an alien. And I went, this is surreal. This is weird. And we got back and we found we had the chance to make something that landed pretty well and was popular with a lot of people. So I'm very proud of that time in a industry that's become increasingly more nomadic to really connect with a core group of people and really make something special. And I'm very thankful for that more and more especially as I get older. So thank you.
Well, so you went from that to, so you did some lecturing and now you're a professor working with, as you said, students full of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that fascinates me about the USC Games program now, in talking to a few people in it, that there's a certain amount of reinvention that has to keep going on, because this is what the podcast is all about, artificial intelligence, that the tools are evolving all the time. And you have students who are absorbing this and they're going to be heading out into the world with a skill set. And again, the sand keeps shifting and the terrain. How do you adjust? How do you reach them? And you must be experimenting all the time. You must be playing with the tools. And so I'm curious, I'll back up a little bit here. When these tools started being developed, when AI started becoming more and more at the forefront, as a professor, you're always looking, you're always researching, you're always looking to iterate. How did this end up on your radar? And how did you, what tools did you become aware of first, and taking those early steps into figuring out what these things are capable of and working it into your workflow, or finding out, how can I teach with this? How can I use this? I'm just curious about sort of your evolution in embracing the technology, because you are very much in the thick of it now.
Wow, that's a beautifully crafted, multi-layered question. Let's see if I can't work maybe from the inside out. The way I look at it is that it's kind of all adult Legos for me. It's creating, it's putting things together, it's seeing what you can do with different tool sets. And sort of the DNA of what I work with is just naturally being on some of the interesting edge work being done by different students, because it's a research university. And so someone will come to me and say, by the way, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. Invariably, I heard about these things coming out, DALL and ChatGPT, in their early inceptions. You can go on to GitHub and see who's doing what. You can subscribe to 2-minute papers. You can always see something, and you build, without knowing it, a small group of enthusiasts that keep each other in the know on what's coming up and what might be interesting. So just to play around with it is a joy for me. Understanding how it can align to a commercial interest is also, and let me back up a bit, I think it's probably better to say a product, a project, because I view video games as art. It has, the generation now is helping bring it out of something that was sort of a plaything when I was growing up, not quite movies, not quite TV, child of a lesser god kind of thing. And I loved it. And I can sit and commiserate on all the geeky names and, showing up at Rusty's Pizza Parlor with a fistful of quarters because I cannot believe I can go into the game and play Battlezone. I'm in it, man. That's the joy behind all this. But there was an equal tech love of, you want to know if you're affected by the play you've seen, the movie you've seen, the food you eat. You want to know how to make it at some point if you're so drawn into that art. And for me, I've always been fascinated by kind of bringing things alive. I remember, flashback to 1979 when I went to St. Louis, Missouri with my family. We were taking vacation from where we lived in Columbia. So we're kind of far away from LA, far away from the hubs of technology. And we walked in and someone had some sort of festival or fair, had Eliza loaded up on the computer. And Eliza, Liza, was a bit of a joke, a bit of a ruse for someone to give you an automated sort of echo back with a couple of variables in it, extracting those nouns from what you had just typed in to ape a therapist. But to me, I was talking to something. And it just amazed me. And even when I found out kind of, the man behind the curtain operating it, or just how it was put together, what it was supposed to do, I just never lost that connection to it's alive. So when I saw the cinematics I'd worked on at Oddworld affect people at GDC or these different E3, I really just hit me. Because I'd worked so long looking at the screen, focusing on the technical, and suddenly it came alive. You put in the effects, you put in the sound, and it just came alive. So a lot of that is very attractive to me, and yet there's this tinkering side of putting things together too. So I would find something delightful and very engaging. And then I would sort of wonder, how can the students adopt it within their own pipeline? What I found was the generations are just inherently getting savvier and savvier about tech because it's part of their life. My kids, 18 and 19, get together and they twin when they were, under the same roof. They would twin every night, speaking in a language that Kat and I were completely divorced from, but we'd sit back and sort of in amazement and listen to the names and the catchphrases. And they were just having their own kind of talk, their own sort of Cockney rhyming slang without trying. It wasn't performative. It was just for each other. And I think the generation is getting savvier and savvier because it is a digital world now. And you might have had to convince an artist previously to get onto Photoshop, whereas now most people have several versions on several different machines. The part about AI that's fascinating to me is it's not just one thing. And it's so available that we're still finding out its emergent use under the control of a creative, whatever that means. So I find it's a dual concern because you want to have them adopt the technology without it slowing down their production cycles.
Interesting.
Yeah, because one of the classes I'm part of is AGP, which is a collection of 3 different classes taught at the same time, sort of in concert with each other. And it's the capstone class for the USC Games students. It's their thesis, if you will, thought up by, executed on, and delivered by students to the world at our expo at the end of the year. And they're on a deadline. And you realize how much they're assimilating. In some cases, having worked for the first time in a larger team, you have to assimilate the technology available at the moment. You have to figure out when the deadline is. You've got to learn what milestones are. Meanwhile, you're learning these complex things called humans and just how to communicate with all the, Bartle is very self-aware that his quadrants of players is done with such a broad brush. We're so different. So understanding the person and what they can connect with is really part of my current fascination, is what story are they trying to tell and how can this technology help them and not provide a distraction or be something that we find ourselves inadvertently forcing on them.
It's interesting you talk about one of the things I've always been impressed with USC students in my time out in LA, because the emphasis was on making, on creating, that deadlines are real when you work in this industry and that they actually help with the creation process, knowing that it's like, I need to work with these people. We need to pull this team together. We need to use these tools and create something. And it may not, it'll be a collection of all of our ideas. But it's interesting that you say, like, because so many tools are being developed and added, like you look at a list from like just the past month of what's come out and what's available. And it's very easy to go down that rabbit hole, but it's like, but you still have to finish something. You still have to create something, integrate it as best you can, or, save it for the next project because there'll be more tools coming out. Because when you say something like Eliza, right? I don't know if you saw over the past week, Sesame, that was sort of all the rage from the last couple of days.
I haven't had time to look at it.
By all means, check it out. It is a glimpse of, we've all talked to like Alexa before. This is the next layer of, and I don't know if you've used Notebook LM and listened to when you feed a bunch of information.
Yes, it comes out like
a podcast.
It creates the podcast. Just jarring when I heard that.
Yeah, well, and they have this very human speech patterns, but if you listen to enough of them, you'll feel like, okay, this is when the algorithm says for them to like hesitate, pause, breathe, or whatever. this Sesame program it feels like you're talking to a person.
Right.
There are moments of real eerie, like, okay, tectonic beneath me because it's not supposed to feel this way. And yet it is. Like, I'm feeling awkward in talking to you because I don't know what to say to you because you feel like a person.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't hold up all the way through, but it's taking that next step. But again, like, you can go down that rabbit hole, but it's like, okay, yeah, that's an interesting tool. It's not at the place yet where you can use it in creation, but it's telling you what's on the way. But another thing you mentioned that fascinates me, because I just talked about this with someone else who's on the podcast, and because it just struck me in the middle of the conversation, one of the things that I love about AI is I haven't had this much fun and sort of sense of play in a long time. In that, like, okay, working on projects, working on video games, working on TV projects. I've worked in writers' rooms. I love it. I love kicking ideas off of people, but it's a process that I've done many times at this point. And so, you know, the hard parts and you know the fun parts. And this is a world of like playing with tools and experimenting, which I haven't done in a while. And it's just seeing the power of them, getting a little frustrated when they don't exactly do what I want them to do. But it's just this sense of play where this is what, like, your students, I don't know if anybody that young fully grasps the moment that they're in, because all of these things are coming out. It's this explosion of creativity. And all of these tools are so incredibly powerful and intriguing. And we haven't settled on like which ones are going to end up being the standard, but all of it frees up imagination and creativity in a way that I don't know if I've been in a moment like this, which is, again, what prompted the podcast, was talking to people about it. Because, yeah, there are, you know, worrying elements, but the empowerment to create, and you're getting to see these 18 to 24-year-old, or however, I don't know how old some of the students are at USC, but it's like the power of creation that you get to see them exploring and having fun and making. And so I'm winding my way to a question in that, so you're using these tools, you're seeing them use these tools. Are there some that really speak to you, that are really powerful, that anyone listening to this podcast, it's like, okay, if you're not playing with this, play with this, start here, because it will unlock and it'll guide you down the path to some of these other tools?
Absolutely. To kind of hop back and forth with the human element, sometimes you'll get a student that wants to present something with a percentage of its presentation being, is this what you want to see to green light this game? It's a projection of what they think is going to be approved. And that's fine. But when they find the kernel within that game of what they personally resonate with, that's when things get interesting. And sometimes it takes weeks to get there because you're doing it along with a whole bunch of people, and we're laying down train tracks about 3 feet in front of a steaming locomotive. So when the students really get to the heart of what it is they want to tell, what narrative, how that parlays into gameplay that needs to happen versus a movie, versus a TV, versus a play, that's when they really electrify into alignment with the rest of the team, because they're infecting the rest of the team. It's got its own beautiful virality to it, as when you're a passionate leader and you kind of connect. The thing I would like people to keep in mind is that I have had these conversations about AI and what it means. And of course, you've got a little bit of the torches and pitchforks. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a programmer at Apple, and his major was philosophy. And so we go back and forth on these kind of things. He sees what I'm doing with ChatGPT and saying creatives should be quaking in their boots. And my retort was, yeah, you want to see the program I wrote for me? So, and his response, which was very measured and insightful, was, yes, if it's repetitive and tedious. Now, this was his mark on it, not mine. If it's repetitive and tedious, then it's much better than us. But I'm here in the core, and I don't think it's going to reach me for a while. And I think that's the wrong conversation. I think that if you enter the conversation of a certain polemic of good or bad, that may already be the wrong way to look at it. I loved your analogy to shifting sands. To pull further geek cred, I say we ride that sandworm because it's coming and it's formidable, and we haven't had anything to date that really echoes it. You could say, we've had outsourcing for years. Yeah, you're at a certain economic level where you can afford it. Or you can say that, you've had clip art for years. Yes, but not so common, not so readily available, and it does so much more. And what I personally find interesting is to use it as a springboard for inspiration, but to remain firm in a bit of a distance, a little arms out, on any temptation to simply lean on it. And there's a big difference here. If you like to meet a friend because they're a little left of center and they've got these weird ideas, you can be in that light and listen to them and kind of be inspired by it. And then you might need to step away to kind of assimilate what that means to you. How does it work in your head? This could be anything regarding life, the universe, and everything, right?
42.
So long, 42. Well played. So long, and thanks for all the fish. So ChatGPT to me is when I have a curiosity about something. When I say, what do you think about da-da-da? Because I know it speaks in bullet points. It's a very finite robot with a very particular, set of way of communicating. It's no Turing test. I mean, you're speaking Sesame here. And I think back to the Voight Kampf of Blade Runner, let me tell you about my mother. You've got that kind of like, is it alive? Is it not? And I think you need to look at ChatGPT as something that could inspire you. In other words, it could send you down areas to instigate some research that you then do on your own. It'll throw out some numbers and some names and a little hallucination here and there. So you never want to encapsulate that and turn that in as work. That's simply lazy and disingenuous. What I think is better doing so is when you're looking up at clouds, shouting at clouds, and you've got this idea, and you go out on there and say, what do you think about this idea? And you get a couple of names. Take those names, write them down, go do some research on those names. ChatGPT has helped a dozen artists on our team, on our various teams, to go down these exploratory rabbit holes of artists that they normally would not be exposed to, the kinds of which I grew up with. Alfredo Alcala, Frank Frazetta, Boris Vallejo, Bernie Wrightson, all these Arthur Suydam, all these monumental, S. Clay Wilson, Robert Crumb. And I show this work to these younger folks that have grown up with the flash of digital art. And there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. I'm not damning any bit of it. But it widens their spectrum of, oh my God, there's so much more. Alphonse Mucha, let's go Egon Schiele. We can go even further back. And it's so new to them. It's so new to the generation. By the way, I'm not sitting here going, boomer, hey, you should get out more often. I'm saying this is humans. We do things in cycles. I go back to something previous to the 1900s, and it's fascinating to me. And what I find it doing is igniting hunger. Igniting a hunger to go do something about it, as opposed to it being framed as something that gives you an easy out as doing your homework for you. So does that make sense how I'm positioning this?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly as a sounding board and being able to see where your ideas are taken by ChatGPT. I use ChatGPT as well. And it's like, that's not exactly what I was intending, but that's an interesting place to take this, or that's something I wasn't aware of. Let me follow that thread. Let me dig a little deeper. For example, I'm working on a video game project, and I'm working on the Bible for it as we expand the IP. And I'm looking at all kinds of possibilities. And all I'm trying to do right now is provoke, I suppose, the producers and the other creatives on the project to say, here are the possibilities as we expand our world, and let's see where this takes us, where you can't just lean on the ideas that are being generated, like just put in a prompt and then print out whatever it spits out. It's a process and a sounding board to provoke collective thought about where do we want to go from here. And then we can decide which rabbit holes that we want to go down. And one thing that you said, that backing up a little bit, you started out by talking about video games as art. And to me, very much, the video game world is a medium that is still finding itself. And it has this benefit of being very tech friendly, right? That, so writing screenplays, writing the stuff that I've worked on in the past, you can insert different kinds of programs like ChatGPT as a sounding board. But in the end, the finished product ends up looking a lot like a screenplay that you've written before. But with something like video games, and you're pulling in art ideas and narrative ideas, and how do you tell great stories? Great stories, we're all constantly surprised by what video game makers are bringing into the world, whether it's The Last of Us. I think it just feels like an AI-friendly world, in that it's like, okay, just what are the possibilities in using these tools for someone like me who's not visual, but being able to play around with a Midjourney or a DALL or whatever, to it's like, okay, I can now visualize some, because I'm not a visual artist, I can write and describe, but now I'm bringing some visuals into the world, and that can further the conversation around what we're trying to create here, which is a very long-winded way of saying I don't want to miss the opportunity. You shared a whole bunch of work with me and I would love for you to talk about it a bit.
Oh, sure.
Because this is all going to go into the show notes, everyone who's listening, that will have links to everything. But this is, prime examples of you are playing with this stuff and you're bringing stuff into the world. That's what these tools allow us to do. So I'm curious talk about what you've been playing with and what you shared.
Would you like me to sort of curate the images or sort of give them context of?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I tried to include here is some of the black and white work I did years ago, because people are so used to digital art, that what I grew up on was that pulp paper that could only show cross-hatching. Couldn't even digest zipatone at that point. So this is very, very pre to Image Comics, super saturated, wonderful blends and all that by 20, 30 years. And I did rapidograph, pen and ink work, because it was so important to get contrast, and it was important to get your eye to look at things. So these rules of engagement within art are still true today. And if you get lost in the glitz of everything shouting for your attention and everything having a pop, it's a good exercise to kind of pull back and just go pen and paper and try to get try to understand where you're guiding the player's eye. When I teach my mobile games classes, I'm very big on, and these are for engineers as well, they're just as creative as anybody else. I do remind them, and I do this in the students in AGP as well, art is not there to pretty it up, it is there to guide. How you arrange it, how you compose it, the language of the shapes that you use, this is all stuff that needs to guide the player's eye. So you can see some very sparse pen work there on the thing called comics. It's a superhero that I briefly did working in an indie comic back in the 80s. Then there was this horror thing where I tried to use a little more heavy contrast, a little more crazy angles. And my own love of Zap comics comes out in the last one called Zap, as it was a pastiche of Moscoso and Robert Crumb and S. Cleve Wilson. And just the kind of subversive surrealism that all that stuff brought, I just adored it. So I went then on to ChatGPT and I asked it to draw up a turnaround of a street ball character. And you can see that it did so in one of the images I gave there, process, PNG. And what it did was, this is something with a free program called Meshi. So people are going to have to Google Meshi and it'll take you to Meshi. It's a free service to a point. And I cleaned up one image of this sort of stylized character. I was really taken aback that they were able to align sort of the back muscles and shoulders. I thought they would screw it up. So I read in one image to Meshi, and it's extrapolated what the back of that character would look like without me ever loading the back image of the character. So that right there, which is, I think, process 2 or 3, I'm terrible with naming the pictures, it shows that when I downloaded it from Meshi and read this into Maya, it had already extrapolated what the back of the shoes would look like without ever having to see them. Now, you might sense a slight line of demarcation at the socks, but it's done a pretty good job just taking that color and saying, it's a biped, these are cargo shorts, I'm going to sort of imagine something there. It's done a pretty good job. It really has. So I wanted to show what's available today, but even when I took it into Maya, this was largely unusable because it's very dense geometry and the texture is not optimized. So it's not exactly a plug and play, and in no way am I saying Meshi is bad. I think it's fantastic. Geometry it gives has a wonderful edge loop to it. What I did instead was it's the green fellow there that's in the middle, process 4. I used it as a template to take one of my existing low poly models and actually scale it down to fit the same space. So what this is doing for me is providing a good template for proportions. I then used Maya's projection system to project the art, the concept art that was done by ChatGPT onto that character. So the first image in the upper left-hand corner, that is what Meshi did, but I replicated that using a lower poly character that I was then able to rig up and animate, and basically got this character dribbling a ball with pre-existing rig, pre-existing animation within an hour. Now, what I think that's good for is prototyping, because I'm very respectful of, you still need this game to evolve, to mutate, to have dozens of minds in it. So the idea of the speed of this is a delightful new level of gray boxing, but I wouldn't put a bow on it, fall in love and say done. I would say it helped me serve a purpose of gray boxing, which in a lot of cases is a little bit of a sticking point for people that are doing this for the first time, is they have this feeling that progress is going to be in the form of something that looks AAA, finished on the first pass. And it's an unconscionable amount of stress that the students put on themselves sometimes. And I try to break them of it, just like I had to be broken of it when I did it for the first time. So I'm trying to show this will help your process in the speed of putting something together. But at that point, you step back and then you show your art. You bring in the lower poly character that you did. You then retexture it. And also there's a small snippet in the upper row, the third one over, which is a screenshot I sent to my friend at Apple, where I said, yeah, ChatGPT wrote this WebP converter for me as a script that I can now run in Photoshop. And it did it in moments because that helped me move faster. It didn't do my work for me. It took a little bit of the tedium off. So this is something that will reflect the intention of the author. And let me see if I can describe that. The intention for me is speed up these tedious little processes, but in no way will you replace my finished art. And if someone comes at it and says, I want you to do this for me, that's a different person at the wheel.
It's interesting. I talked with another artist on one of the podcasts, and he was talking about his process where he starts with his sketches, kicks it into the system, plays around with it, iterates with using it, draws it back out. It's like, okay, I like these ones, but this is what I want to do with it. I'm going to play with it some more, do some more sketching on it, feed it back in, and iterating back and forth. And the finished product is, he has a certain very distinct style. It could not have been done by anybody but him. That it's a part of the workflow. It's a part of the process, but it can never replace what he brings. And that's where, we all have our own ethical lines when it comes to how much is too much and how much of us needs to be in there. But I think we know in our gut when we create, when we're leaning on something and when it is a tool that just helps bring out what it is we're trying to accomplish. And it's interesting, you talk about how it one of the biggest unlocks for me, interestingly enough, was an unlock in that it liberates, as you're saying, some of the tedium, some of those steps where it's like you can just get something done. You can just iterate. And you may have heard this, and excuse my vulgar language, but in writing, they talk about the shitty first draft. There's your book, bird by bird. And it's just like, just get it out. It's not going to be great when you put it out. Like you said, it's unconscionable amounts of stress to think that it has to be brilliant when it comes out. It's just not going to be. But then you can look at what you had, see what's good about it, and then continue to, like, there's an old Steve Martin joke where he said, well, people, what they don't know about Da Vinci is that he did everything in one stroke. It was just Mona Lisa. Look at that. It's like, no, that's not how art is created. It's one of my favorite words in the English language is palimpsest, where it's layers upon layers upon layers. And if you do x-rays of paintings by the masters, there's many, many versions of it behind the finished version because they kept layering on top because it wasn't quite right yet. It had to keep getting iterated. And so if those are the best artists in history, then what makes any of us think that our first drafts are going to be anything other than shitty?
Absolutely. And not only is that a very important reminder that art is iterative, but you've also just won Scrabble with palimpsest. So well done there.
That's too many letters, though.
Too many letters. It needs a Z. So the other thing I put into this portfolio is something that I hope people can see, which is this is some of my digital work now, which is right there under Wagering V37. It's a little mobile game that I'm working on with some friends. And I am as much a fan of the digital style as anyone. And you have to make things pop when you're on a mobile screen. Yeah, and this is a Photoshop mock-up that AI had very little to do with. And that's not let me actually tell you where it had agency. I shouldn't say nothing to do with. So the biodome is a little bit of concept art, but it was so basic that I ran it through a little bit of an iteration using Stable Diffusion, and then I layered in its touches using Photoshop in transparency. So you can see sort of this organic veininess at the top of this mushroom, right? And then over on the middle there, it gave a little more Blade Runner lightning, and I liked it, and I put that in. But I also used, resources and royalty-free art that you can find to paint it in here and paint it in there. Cite your sources every time. And it was a lot of fun to do that. So it had a little bit of input here. But my point was to get this together as a mock-up for the team as soon as I could. So I also went to the Unity Asset Store and would buy the packs of those badges in the upper left-hand corner because that put the art there quickly. I was able to spend my time on the custom stuff that no one had. The turntable, the robots, their designs, the textures, the overall layout. So I'm very respectful of digital art. I'm in no way coming at it. I'm saying the same applies here at the speed with which you have to do it. The other thing is I took a little sketch that I'd done of Frank Frazetta's painting of John Carter, Warlord of Mars. And you can see the sketch, and I ran that through Meshi, and it did not understand the foreshortening. It didn't understand the shadows, the Frazetta core running down the midsection there. And you can actually see its output, and it was a stretched mess. So it's just a tool. It has its limits. And there you are. So it had its own interpretation of what it was because it has currently a fairly limited understanding. And that's not to sit and wait until it has a better one. I'm just saying these will always be tools. So it's what it's currently good at there on the right, the stylized inked adventure is what it called it. Street baller, okay. And then swashbuckler charge for the one on the left. So Meshi named these. I thought that was delightful.
That's interesting. I think anyone who plays with these tools enough you marvel at what it can do. And then you run up against what it can't, at least yet. But, every now and again, there's another evolution. I've mentioned on this podcast a number of times now, as one of those odd creative benchmarks, the Will Smith eating spaghetti. And just how far it came in 1 year and what's it going to be like in another year if we're riding the exponential curve. These, like you said, these are tools, but they're going to become ever more refined tools. And I'm just sort of fascinated to see where they go from here, which leads me into, as we're heading towards wrapping this up, a dual question. And I'll start a little further out in that. So you're working with students and they don't necessarily know a world without these tools. They're being introduced early on. How do they feel about AI and about the agency and ability to use these tools versus, their artistic skill set without the tools and then combining the two. How do they feel about, its evolution and where it's going from here?
There's an interesting bias with some. I've come to call it the Scarlet AI. You've got to get rid of this idea that it's one or the other. The students that embrace it or come to us and say, how can we use this? We love to work with them. And there's a lot of them out there. They come and they say, hey, I did this. How can I combine this work into what I do? Ultimately, the students are magnificent at assimilation. What they deserve is a wider range of things to pick from, because even the internet can only sort of exponentially increase your exposure to something you're familiar with, a certain style of art, and you can get a lot of that art, or you can go down a totally new road if someone were to take you and say, by the way, Cuphead was actually Fleischer Brothers Studios. It was Inkwell. It was Betty Boop. It was all this rubber hose animation from this era, and there's a lot of it. And that might turn them on to Popeye. That might turn them on to all kinds of characters they hadn't seen before. And Cuphead's success showed me that the old is new. So the students are incredibly good at assimilating technology. Sometimes I feel like it's our job to try and give a wider range of things to have at the buffet table. Turning one student on to Pushpin Studios, Milton Glaser, Chwast from the 60s, 70s, that whole Yellow Submarine look, flowing back into the kind of the psychedelia, Peter Max, etc. All that stuff is so incredibly new that I want to bring in more people that are hungry for that, because they're quite adept at the style that you might see on and again, I'm not coming at anybody here, but like DeviantArt, it has a lot of wonderful, magnificent, highly polished work. Not that sketches don't exist, but you know where I'm coming from on this. If you have this appetite of, I want to try this, I want to try that, and that's what I tried to show in just the pen and ink work, is even just the parsimony of pen and ink can investigate a lot of different styles. So the technology is here to inspire you, no matter what it is, to go further and reach further as an artist or as a writer or as a musician. All these things are inspirational. As you said, great way of looking at a sounding board for inspiration.
And so, like the best teachers, you are not only imparting this wisdom and introducing all of these tools to the students, but you are using them, creating, again, I'll be sharing out the images that you shared here, that you're playing with all these tools and making and creating. And I'm the other half of this question then is, where do you see things going from here? And what are you hoping to accomplish in the years ahead using these tools as you continue to...
Wow, that's heavy. I am thrilled to be involved with a generation that has taken something I've loved for all my life, and they're raising it to an art form. I want to see the continued investigation and evolution and mutation of that art form by having the technical process be investigated as well. Meaning, don't come with a finished idea. See what kind of a nice random mess you can get on the way there. So where I hope it goes, I don't have an answer for the actual IP or the product. What I'm hoping is that there is an unquenchable curiosity for the process, to not just be shorthand to get somewhere, but an investigation of the noodling, the cut-up technique of taking words and cutting them up and reposting them together and trying to say that. This investigative art, the people I went to see Laurie Anderson on stage. I was a big fan of her work in the 80s, and just the way that there was all this kind of, what is new? What is art? So having it affect other people and not having your vision tainted by your illusion of success is what I hope for these students, because that's what's helping push this whole bloody thing into the art form it is. And that never loses that.
And I'm with you there. I am really excited. I hear ideas that people kick around, and I don't fully have my head around how it's going to work. I'm just excited that it becomes a possibility and that people are going to be wrestling with this. An example would be, I know that there are some game developers doing the next wave of AAA projects because they have the time and the money to do this, to play around with having AI generated on the fly NPCs that you can encounter in a game and you can talk to them. It'll be a unique conversation, and it'll send you on a unique side quest, one that is generated on the spot. And again, I don't know exactly how that works and how it operates. I'm just fascinated because suddenly there is creation happening and you're interacting with this system and doing something that, I mean, because for me, the experience, there is the shared experience where you can talk to other people about your experience within a game and a narrative that everyone experienced. And then there's the experience if you are a completionist and you've done every little side quest and whatnot, you can talk about things that you did that other people didn't do or approaches you took that they didn't do. But even that's somewhat finite. But if you add that extra layer of it's unique to you, it's something no one else got to experience. How fascinating within a world other people have some familiarity with.
I love that because you've given it this, it's sort of Timothy Leary adjacent, not in the stereotyped way, but more like that's an area of investigation is just existence, consciousness are laughable now, but there was a time when evoking a movie was laughable years ago. I didn't think there would be anything as cool as Tron, the first one. So
thank you for the proviso there, but yes, the first
absolutely. One. Yeah. So yeah, let's just continue to be fascinated by this, right? Writing that neon sandworm.
That's a fantastic place to end. I thank you so much for your time. And as I've been telling the other guests, if nothing else, we're going to check in somewhere down the line because things are changing rapid fire, and seeing, how all of us are adjusting and your students are adjusting to those ever shifting sands. But keep creating. You're fascinating. I love looking at your work and I'm fascinated to see what your students are creating. But let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Creative AI Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or visit creativeaipod.com.